Alright, what is up, people? I just got done watching episode 5 of Loki season 2, and I was honestly a little bit disappointed at first, though I definitely think that it turned itself around by the end. I think it got off to a bit of a slow start, but I don't think that necessarily means it was bad by any means. I just think that it had a bit of a slow start, that's just how it goes sometimes. Anyway, though, pretty much what myself and a lot of people were thinking was going to happen is happening, it looks like. Loki's able to control his time slipping finally by the end of the episode, and prior to that, he got the band back together, right? He hopped around to different timelines, not necessarily of his own free will, but he hopped around to different timelines, and he ended up collecting all the TVA members that were close to him when the TVA was getting destroyed. Though before we go any further, I do want to point out that there's another video that is related to this one that I am going to release at a separate time, and it's a bit more well scripted, and I was actually planning on having it released prior to the release of episode 5 of Loki season 2. However, I did end up getting a copyright block from Marvel, so I ended up having to rework that a little bit, so I'm just going to upload both of these around the same time, and we're just going to see how those do. Anyway, though, it's interesting that essentially what a lot of people thought was going to happen did happen, right? Loki's going around to these different timelines, and yes, Mobius is in fact a jet ski salesman among many other things, right? He works for Piranha, I think it's like motorsports or something like that. And yes, we've seen that Casey is, I think it's Alcatraz that he escaped from, so he's one of the 3 inmates that escaped from Alcatraz, and no one ever found out what happened to them. So that's kind of awesome that actually was found out. I think the first place I heard that from was Eric Voss over at New Rockstars, so hey, props to him for figuring that one out. Though what I really want to talk about is the fact that essentially my theory, I think, was proven right by this episode, that being that Loki is now a being unstuck from time, no longer confined by the shackles of time and space. And that was even said by Ouroboros, or I guess not actually Ouroboros, I can't remember what his name actually is in this episode. But it's pretty fascinating because Obi is totally right. Loki is not now just traveling from different points on a single timeline, he is traveling through time and space. He's traveling to different timelines, it would seem. Unless somehow they're all on the same timeline, but that doesn't really seem to make sense. But what I'm getting at, though, is Loki is a being that seems to be displaced from time. I think that somehow his temporal aura got extracted from time and space itself during the first episode of Loki Season 2, and I think that that's super important, right? So in my other video, I talk about the fact that I think that it's almost as if Loki never even existed on that timeline to begin with. And I think that matters because everyone else just comes through TVA doors. Like, everyone just comes through TVA time doors. Whereas Loki is the only one at this point that is actually time slipping, right? And I wonder if this even connects to Loki's connection to Norse mythology, which is the fact that in Norse mythology, Loki is pretty much the person, or god, I guess, that causes Ragnarok, right? He is the person who ends up causing the end of everything. Though, Ragnarok is cyclical. Ragnarok is essentially a death and rebirth of everything, of the universe. And I find it interesting because when I tie in the Norse themes, it makes me wonder if this season is essentially pointing out that no matter what Loki does, maybe he really is bound to lose. Maybe Loki really is an unintentional villain no matter what he does. Because my guess, based especially on what we've heard from Marvel themselves, Kang is going to be in this final episode, like the Kang the Conqueror that is going to lead the multiverse saga as long as they keep Jonathan Majors on the payroll. So, if that's going to be the case still, then it stands to reason that pretty much no matter what Loki does, in the end, he is going to cause the multiversal war. He is going to cause the birth of He Who Remains. He is going to cause the creation of Kang the Conqueror, the creation of the Council of Kangs. There just has to be something about this that in the end, no matter how hard Loki tries not to lose, how hard he tries to be a hero, that it just doesn't work. And this was kind of echoed by Brad, or X5, earlier in the season. He points out the fact that he's trying to make up for all the bad things he did, and in the end, we do see that in this episode, he is still selfish. If Sylvie does not talk Loki down, then Loki would just immediately end up going through with it, and would go attempt to save the TVA. And that wouldn't necessarily be wrong if for some reason all of reality is going to fall apart, right? Like, that is not necessarily a positive outcome. So I wonder if this is essentially a situation in which no matter what Loki does, he's bound to create Kang. He's bound to create chaos. In Norse mythology, Loki is an agent of chaos, neither good nor bad. In this instance, no matter what Loki is trying to do, he's doing it out of a good heart. He's doing it for a good purpose, especially when he sees that everything is just falling apart. But he is also still very selfish. He says to Sylvie that he's doing this because he wants his friends back. Loki doesn't know where he belongs without the TVA members at this point. They're the only, real family he's ever known. Him and Thor never really got along all that well, especially not at this point in the timeline from when Loki was taken from. And so the TVA is essentially his home. And you can see that he almost kind of takes on that villainous role of being the He Who Remains who ends up recruiting the TVA members. Because he tells Mobius that, this isn't essentially his real life, that his real life is on the TVA, that his real name is Mobius. Even though that's not true, he is from the timeline. And so Loki had to realize that, oh yeah, no, these people actually do live on the timeline. They actually do have lives, maybe they would be better off that way. But obviously that's just not the case. Because if that were the case, then not everything would fall apart. But I really just think that it's set up that way because Kang has already written it out to play out this way. And no matter what Loki tries to do, this was always meant to happen. I think that unless he was somehow able to time slip much further back, it's not really going to affect much, right? If he's only able to time slip back to the point at which the TVA and everything was destroyed, then he's still just following Kang's plan, the plan of He Who Remains in the end. At least that's what it would seem like to me. But I don't know. If you've got other thoughts, then you can let me know. Though I really wonder what's going to be next for Loki. So now we can assume that the final episode of this season is going to be the one in which we see multiple attempts, most likely, at trying to save the TVA. And most likely what that's going to be is Victor Timely going out there a bunch of times, maybe sending other people out in the suit, possibly even Mobius. I thought I saw a clip of that in one of the trailers. Though it does look like in the end Loki's going to be the one that walks out onto the gangway, and he's going to be the one that in some way stops the destruction of the sacred timeline, right? And if that does end up being the case, and I wonder if this will just create a multiverse in which the timelines are much easier to interact with each other, and I wonder if this could obviously in some way play into Quantumania. I think a lot of people are really thinking that somehow the end of Loki Season 2 is going to heavily play into the post-credit scene of Quantumania, in which we see the Council of Kangs, and how the Council of Kangs talk about the fact that there are people out there that are starting to touch the multiverse, and that essentially if they continue to do this, they will destroy everything that the Council of Kangs has built. And we don't really know what the Council of Kangs has built. Have they just built a more perfected version of what He Who Remains had? Insofar as they have a TVA that actually manages a multiverse rather than a single timeline? I don't really know. Honestly, it's really up in the air right now. I think that there's still going to be some major answers answered in episode 6. Because realistically, I think that this episode really answered some questions that a lot of people were already pretty sure were the case, right? Everyone was pretty sure that Mobius in some way was a jet ski salesman, though we were all wrong that he was living in the 90s. And of course, everyone was actually wrong about OB, though. That's one of the big things. OB is not some immortal, powerful being. He is someone who lived on the timeline, and in fact, he's just a really smart dude. He's just a really smart dude who's super into science fiction. And in the end, it still is a very much so Ouroboros situation, because he literally gets the TVA handbook that he supposedly wrote that was inspired by Victor Timely. It's a whole very confusing thing, right? I definitely want to break this down more in another video. I just kind of wanted to get my reaction out there. Because I thought this was just such an interesting episode, because it's very much so a pivotal point. In some ways it kind of is almost a filler episode. I wouldn't call it filler, but definitely not as much happens as probably some people were expecting to. I know that for myself, I expected a lot more to happen. I think that whatever goes down in the next episode is going to be crazy, especially if it's actually going to be introducing Kang in some way. So I don't know. What do you think? Is Loki actually somehow displaced from time and completely separate from other beings, and essentially more powerful in some ways now because he's not as attached to time and space? I don't know. I guess we're gonna have to wait and see. Obviously, though, in some way, I think that Loki's going to lose. I just don't think that this is going to go as well for Loki as he thinks it will, you know? In a lot of ways, the theme of this season seems to be the theme of the Ouroboros, and in the end, I think that no matter what Loki does, is just going to create the multiversal war, and it's going to create He Who Remains. I mean, that's what he said was going to happen, right? He said that if they put that dagger in his chest, then it would recreate everything. And so I think that no matter what we think is going down, and even if we think that somehow Loki has changed the timeline or changed the course of events that will lead to the creation of the TVA, I'm just not sure that's the case. I think that even if that is somehow the case, though, I think it's probably going to still end up working out better for Kang than I think it's going to work out for everyone else. And so we're just going to have to wait and see. But this has been me rambling. I've been Noctugal. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Peace out.
Do you enjoy killing?
I'll kill you.
What, like you did your mother? You weren't born to be king, Loki. You were born to cause pain and suffering and death. That's how it is. That's how it was. That's how it will be. All so that others can achieve their best versions of themselves.